Good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't read Hebrew or would prefer to have it in English, just click on the link that I sent in the chat, and that will take you to the page which we are going to be following. I just want to mention that this week's class is dedicated to Dvorah Bas Sarah, whose Yortzeit, whose how do you say, commemoration of the day of her passing is tonight, her Yortzeit, and also to someone who asked to remain anonymous for unity in the family, that the family should stick together, and the family that hangs together obviously is able to accomplish much more than families who do not. So we wish her all the blessings, and God willing, things will improve. Okay, what we are going to do tonight, you can see the text over here, is Shaar HaYichud vehaEmuna, as it's called, the gate of unity, or oneness, if you like, and faith. Now, what does that mean? You'll see what it means essentially, but it's not pushing anything down anybody's throat in terms of beliefs. What it does is it explains what things are relevant essentially for meditation and understanding, and which things are just have to be taken on faith in the sense that they can't really be explained. It's possible maybe to experience them, but not really to explain them. And there's many things that fall into that category. What this is actually a work by Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who is also better known as the Alter Rebbe, the Old Rebbe, as he's sometimes called. And he was the founder of the Chabad movement of Chassidic philosophy. Chabad is one of the branches of Hasidism. It's the more intellectual branch, I suppose you could say. And he wrote this work which explains, essentially, the explanation is of how the world at each and every moment is brought into being. And we will explain that in great length. And he also explains some fundamental concepts in Chassidic thought, and as well as explaining the idea of individual divine providence and continuous creation and so on and so forth. Many fundamental concepts in Chassidic thought. This work is actually the second section of the famous book Tanya. It's a Chassidic masterpiece it's a masterpiece of Chassidic philosophy. And he had intended to actually put this as the first part, but for some reasons which I'm not 100% clear on, he decided to make this the second part rather than what now exists as the first part of Tanya. In any event, it is a seminal work, this particular thing, it's 12 chapters, seminal work, very important ideas, and very clearly explained. So without further ado, let's begin. It begins with a verse, as do many Chassidic discourses. A discourse being an exposition of a certain idea or series of ideas or interlinked ideas and so on. So this discourse begins with the verse, "V'yadata hayoim v'hashevoisa el levavecha." You should know this day and bring it down to your heart. Place it on your heart. In other words, it should be a settled thing. Ki Hashem hu Elokim. That God in His transcendence and in His immanence are the same thing. Hashem hu Elokim, the transcendent aspect of divinity, is exactly the same thing as the immanent aspect of divinity. They're not two separate things, separate gods, God forbid, right? It's all one thing. In the heavens above and down on earth below, there is no other. Right? There's only God. That's all there is. Now, there are a number of important ideas. I'm not going to go into great depth in all the ideas. I would rather get some breadth rather than a lot of depth at this point in time. But in any event, there is an important idea here. The first idea is vehaEmuna. You have to know. Now, what does knowledge mean? Knowledge is not information. Right? Information is, there's another word for information in Hebrew. It's not da'at. The word da'at in Hebrew, if I just write that 1 second here, I'll write it on the board. I'll write it down here. The word da'at in Hebrew, da'at. Da'at means, essentially, the word da'at means knowing, but not knowing in a way of information. It means knowing it in a sense intimately. The first, or no, it's actually not the first, the very first time we have the word da'at is in the Eitz HaDa'at Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But what does it mean, the tree of knowledge of good and evil? It means that that particular, whatever it was, whether it was a plant, it was a tree, whatever it was, let's not get into that now. But the idea is that acquiring that knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, would become part of us, and that was the problem. That's why it was forbidden to Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, was forbidden to have that knowledge, because that knowledge was not knowledge from a distance. It wasn't information. It was intimate knowledge. In fact, the first time we find the word da'at used in verb form is in when Adam has intimate relations with Eve, with Chava. Adam and Chava have intimate relations. It says, Adam yada es Chava. Adam knew Chava. He knew her carnally, or carnally is really the wrong word, but he knew intimately. That's the concept of da'at. So da'at isn't information in that sense. Da'at is living experience, which is experienced in an intellectual way, but nevertheless a living experience. It's not simply information. So vehaEmuna, you have to know today and place upon your heart. In other words, you have to feel the corresponding emotions, the emotions corresponding to your knowledge. And in Western science, emotions are just simply not part of the process of knowing at all. In Jewish philosophy, it's definitely that way. Knowledge and emotion are intimately linked. In fact, the sphere of da'at, let me just, I should have gotten this ready, but I didn't. Just a second here. The sphere and powers, yeah, we'll just go with this one. 1 second, folks. Will come up shortly on the screen. The sphere of da'at is said to be, which I will show you on the screen shortly. Here we go. Yeah, the sphere of da'at. Let me just remove the let me just erase this here. Okay, there we go. Fine. Okay, so the sphere of da'at, which is over here, is said to be the key to the emotions. As you can see, key to the emotions. Da'at is called the miftach in the Zohar. Da'at is a miftacha, or maftacha, the key, the kolil shis, the key to the 6 emotional powers of the soul, right? So da'at is the key to the emotions, and therefore, when a person has da'at, he has control of his emotions. He can direct his emotions. How do you change an emotion? Not by working on the emotions, but by working on the da'at which controls the emotions. right? As we say over here, das is consciousness. It can mean knowledge as well, but knowledge is not a good translation, because one tends to think of knowledge as information. It's not. Knowledge, as we said before, is intimate knowledge, awareness, intimate connection. It's the key to the emotions. Okay, so having explained what the concept of dat is, we have to know and bring into the heart, right? In other words, there has to be a corresponding emotional arousal of love or AWE. You could translate that as fear as well if you want. It's not the most the happiest translation. Let's call it fear. Let's call it, instead of fear, let's call it awe. Reverence perhaps would be a good translation. So feeling feelings of love and reverence towards God, obviously, when one has this proper intimate knowledge of what? The intimate knowledge that Hashem Hu Elokim, God is Lord, or as we will explain, every name, every divine name, there's actually 10 primary divine names, as I've explained on many occasions before, actually 10 divine names, one associated with each of the sfirot, and each of these names has a function associated with it, an activity associated with it. When Moses wanted to know, when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know God's name at the burning bush, he asked him, who shall I say sent me? When Moses was being sent, he was out in the desert, he was being sent. He'd run away from Egypt, he was in Midian, and he was in the desert tending the sheep, or in the wilderness rather, tending the sheep. And he had this vision of a burning bush, etc. I'm sure all of you know the story. And God spoke to Moshe from the burning bush. And he said, go to Egypt and take my people out of Egypt, right? The redemption from Egypt, from exile in Egypt. And so Moses wanted to know, well, who shall I say sent me? When I go to the elders of the Jewish people, they're going to say, where we have a tradition as to who it is that will redeem us from Egypt, because they knew they would be redeemed eventually. Who am I going to say sent me? And God replies to him, Shmi ata mevakesh leida, my name you want to know, you wish to know. Lefi ma'asai ani yikra, according to my deeds I am called. So each name, each divine name represents a certain activity. God himself doesn't have a name, right? He doesn't need a name. It's only the names are clues as to what type of activity is going on. So when the name, which is represented just by the letter Hey, but it really should be written as follows. Let me just write it here. We need Hebrew here, 1 second. The name should be written as this. It should be written like this. Yud Kei Vav Kei in Hebrew, right? Yud Kei Vav Kei is the ineffable name. Called the ineffable name, the name which represents the idea of past, present, and future all at once, transcendent. Past, present, and future all at once. There's a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and Hey. Okay, so that name, which is the name, the transcendent name of God. See, it always does this. Unfortunately, I don't know how to fix that up, but it does. Okay, so that's the transcendent name of God. And what we're looking for is not only the transcendent name of God, but also the immanent aspect. In other words, God within nature. There's God as he transcends nature, God as he is in himself, represented by the name Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, Havaya as it's called. And then the name of God as he is found within creation, The name Elokim, as we pronounce it, is the same numerical value as the word Hateva, nature. So God within nature, God within creation, in other words. So that aspect, the transcendent idea of God and the immanent idea of God, all of them, both of them are the same thing. Bashamayim Imal, in the heavens above, in other words, in spirituality, in spiritual planes of existence, Valha'aretz mitachas, and on the earth below. Ein oid, there's none other, it's all the same thing. It is all the same thing. There's no difference between immanent and transcendent. It only appears that way to us because we have to look at it from the point of view of God's activities. Oh, we'll explain this in much more detail. But the first question that he asks on this verse is, why would you even think that there is some kind of different God, I mean, in the heavens above or in the earth underneath or whatever, in the waters, that would make you, that you have to be warned? Well, put it on your heart. In other words, confirm it very strongly, even emotionally, confirm that God is one. There's no difference. Okay, so now we could skip the question and just go on to the rest of the text. I can just read it. Would you possibly think that there's some different God in the waters underneath the earth or in the water than there is in the heavens? That you have to be warned so much to bring it down to your heart. What does this mean? So he's going to explain. It is written in Psalms, always your word is firmly established in the heavens. What does that mean? I'm pretty sure Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov explains, the author of the Tanya wanted to make sure that he mentioned the Baal Shem Tov early on in his discourse over here, in his explanation, because this was the teaching that the Baal Shem Tov emphasized very, very much. Who was the Baal Shem Tov? The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Chassidic thought. He lived in the early 1700s, 1698, some people say 1700 to 1760. Those are the years that he lived. The Baal Shem Tov was a revolutionary figure in many, many ways. He revolutionized the whole energy of Jewish thought up until that time. He revolutionized it. And what his revolution was, I don't want to go into now. Perhaps it's a subject we can discuss at a later date. In any event, the Baal Shem Tov explains, Ki dvarcha, the word, shaumarta, that you said, talking about God, right? The words that you said, Yehi rakia b'toch hamayim, may there be a firmament, or there shall be a firmament in the heavens, or a firmament between the waters, separating between the upper waters and the lower waters. This was one of the utterances at the beginning of creation. Our sages tell us, Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, I think, the world was created with 10 utterances. God said there shall be light, and there was light. God said there shall be a firmament separating between the higher waters and the lower waters. Some call it a sky, right, between the higher waters and the lower waters, and so it was, and so on and so forth. Right, to let the earth bring forth herbs and grasses, and eventually animals and human beings. All of these are the Asara Mamoras, the 10 utterances through which the world was created. And there were only 10 of them. So, these 10 utterances, therefore, stand, says the Baal Shem Tov, stand in the heavens or stand within creation to bring creation into being, as he will explain. These words and these letters, these words and these letters are firmly established forever within the heavens, and within all of the heavens. There's more than one level of heaven. There's 7 actually levels of what are called the Rakim. To bring them into being. Now we're only talking about the second of the 10 utterances. The one which says, Yehirakia, let there be a firmament, or let there be a sky. Right? Separated between higher waters and lower waters. But the same applies to all of them. all of the utterances that were uttered at that time, each utterance is a source for another aspect of creation. And the point that he's going to make is that it didn't happen once upon a time, however many years ago it was, according to Jewish tradition, 5,777 and a half years ago right now. It didn't only happen once, it's happening from moment to moment, at every moment, and he's going to explain this and explain why. Okay, so he says that these words, these letters, are closed within the heavens, as it is written in the verse, the Davar Elokeinu Yokum Lo'olam, the word of God stands forever. Udvarov, and his words, Chayim V'Kayomim La'ad, live and exist forever. Here's the point. If the letters would be withdrawn for even a moment, God forbid, they would go back to their original source. Everything would be as if not, would return to a state of absolute nothingness. As if there was nothing there, there had never ever been anything, as if nothing had ever been there. In other words, it wouldn't leave a trace, it would be nothing left. Now, let me explain what we're what the text is saying over here. Very important and fundamental concept. The idea here is just 1 second. Oh, okay, yeah. The idea here is that all of creation comes into being through these 10 utterances. What is an utterance? An utterance is not a thing. Creation is an ongoing process. It is not a noun, it's a verb. Creation is not a noun, it's a verb. In other words, it's a constant activity of bringing things into being. This is what he's going to explain. He's going to explain it at some length, that to bring something into being, there's a difference between, we'll see that later on, there's a difference between a human being who, let's say, makes a pot or something, a piece of pottery, right? A pot out of clay. What does he do? He takes, this in the second chapter explains this, he takes a piece of clay and he shapes it into a pot. And once he's shaped it into a pot and perhaps baked it in a kiln and made sure that it's hard and dried out and so on and so forth, he can go away. He can even pass away and it's not going to make a difference to the pot. The pot will continue to remain. However, creation is not that way. It's not that something is made and then God goes and does something else. And he's preoccupied with other things and he doesn't need to bother anymore with this world. No, this world is being recreated from moment to moment, constantly, continuously. There's a continuous creation. That's what the main point here is that he's explaining. Continuous creation. The world continues to be created from moment to moment. And if the process of creation would be withdrawn for even a moment, all of creation would cease to exist. It would cease to exist. There would be nothing. There would be absolutely nothing. Okay, so someone asked a question here. Yes, an utterance is an ongoing process of creation and not a one-time event. That is absolutely correct. That's exactly how to say it. Yes, it's an ongoing event. It's not a one-time thing, which is why it is called an utterance. The speeches, the 10 utterances through which the world was created. Why is it called an utterance? Because when you speak the words can be heard. The words are there, they exist. As soon as you stop speaking, there's silence, the words are no longer there, right? True, maybe and historically there's a trace of them or whatever, but practically speaking, when I'm speaking, you can hear me. When I stop speaking, there's silence. That's the way it is with creation as well. The creation is constantly being spoken into being. If it would be withdrawn to the level of thought, if it would be withdrawn up into thought, then the world would exist only in thought. They wouldn't exist in actuality. In fact, they wouldn't exist in deed. They wouldn't, because deed and speech, same thing basically. Okay, Ernest asked another question. How ironic, God spoke to us personally in this way, and we create a barrier between personal connection that separates us from Him. Yes. It's difficult but necessary to be personal. Yes, correct. Yeah, it is difficult to be personal and to have that personal relationship. But as an Orthodox Jew, I practice that 4 times a day. And some people practice it even 5 times a day, and some people practice it even more than that. Why did I say 3 times a day? 3 times a day is the 3 prayers that you have every day. There's 3 main prayers. There's the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening prayer. And then there's a prayer before you go to sleep. And there are some people who have another prayer, which is the midnight prayer. It's called Tikkun Chatzos. Although it used to be that everybody would pray that prayer, today, because of the hustle and bustle of modern life, it's kind of difficult to do that. Although I just had a guest in my house this week, Sunday and Monday. A Kabbalist from Israel, a very accomplished and very distinguished Kabbalist, was visiting. And we had some very interesting discussions. He runs an organization, a school really. He runs a school, which begins, the school begins a half an hour before midnight and goes until dawn. That's when they learn. They study half an hour before midnight and continue through the wee hours of the morning until dawn. Then at dawn, they go and dip themselves in what's called a mikveh, a ritualarium, a pool of water, special ritual pool of water. And then they say the morning prayers. Yeah, they do the morning prayers early. They do the morning prayers, coming to the main part of the morning prayer at sunrise, right? Coming to the main part of the morning prayer at sunrise. But these particular Kabbalists probably spend a very long time in their at prayer. They probably spend an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at morning prayers. It takes a while. Gloria asks, let us ask, could they be the formula underlying all matter? Yes, that is exactly what it is. Just as you have the DNA formula of each living creature, and it has a particular format and a particular stamp. So to speak, the DNA of all of creation is this underlying 10 utterances. Now, the 10 utterances are made out of 22 letters, and he's going to speak about that soon. But it's interesting to note that there are really 22 pairs of chromosomes in the human genome. There's a third one, 23rd, depending, and that determines what the gender of a person is, X or Y, and so on. In any event, it's a very fascinating idea. But yes, that is the underlying structure of all matter. And it's not only the underlying structure of physical matter, but it's also the underlying structure of the spiritual worlds, all of the spiritual worlds. Although one wouldn't apply the term speech to the other worlds, one would apply the term thought and deeper thought to the other worlds. But in any event, yes, there's an underlying structure that's based on the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And he's going to explain that these 22 letters of the alphabet are individually certain blocks. Each letter is a certain block of energy, right? If you want to put it this way, it's a block of information. But information is useless unless you know the key to the information, unless you can bring the information into practice. So that's what we're going to talk about soon. We're going to talk about this whole concept of information soon. I mean, today, information science is one of the hottest branches of science, and scientists are coming around to the idea that all of existence is merely information contained in cells and atoms and subatomic particles and so on and so forth. And these are all what we are essentially discussing right now. All right, so that's the basic idea. So if the main point that he's making right now is that if this speech, these divine utterances would cease to be spoken, they would be withdrawn, then the physical world would just disappear. It would not be there anymore. I like to compare it, although it's not an exact comparison, but I like to compare it to like radio waves, right? The radio waves are always there, but unless your receiver is tuned in to the radio wavelength of the transmitter through your antenna or whatever it is, you're not going to hear anything, you're not going to see anything, you're not going to capture anything, right? But as soon as you switch on your receiver, and the receiver is tuned to the right station, then it picks up things that otherwise would have been inaudible or invisible. Same thing would apply to TV waves, like television. Same basic idea. Unless you're tuned into it, you don't hear it. It's not there. In radio waves, it's easy to see because it's like in the air, right? It's filling all of creation over there, but it's not known because we're not tuned in. We can tune into it and actually hear, and when I say hear, I don't mean it literally, but one can sort of tune into the vibrations of the universe, so to speak, by harmonizing with them. One has to learn how to do that. That's part of what prayer is all about. It's part of what meditation is all about, and getting in tune with the information, so to speak. Then one starts to vibrate together with the divine vibrations that are called the 10 utterances. At that point in time, obviously, a person would know, would basically know everything. It would be like he would be a prophet. Not so straightforward, but something to aspire to. Okay, so there we go. And all of the creations in all of the worlds, even on this lowly earth, this physical earth, agashmis, even in this physical creation, the literal inanimate objects, right? Inanimate objects. Of course, there's a difference traditionally in the writings of the Arizal and the writings of the sages in general. Make very clear distinctions between 4 different realms of existence. The inanimate realm of existence, like water and rocks and stones and things like that, sand, whatever, inanimate objects, things that don't have a soul, so to speak, but we'll see soon they have a spark of energy which could be called a soul, but they don't have an animating soul. They just have an existential soul, I suppose you could call it. So that's inanimate. Then there's the kingdom or the plant kingdom. And then there's the animal kingdom, and then there's the human kingdom, the kingdom of human beings who communicate, who speak, called Medaber, those who speak. So all of these kingdoms really depend on God's constant uttering them into being. So that even doimeim, even inanimate objects, are brought into being from moment to moment by this utterance that's causing them to exist, as we'll see shortly. If they would be removed from it for even a moment, the letters of the 10 utterances, that through them, that by way of them, the earth was created, in the 6 days of creation, as a choseres la'ayin ve'efes mamish, return to absolute nothing. It wouldn't exist. Just as it was before before the 6 days of creation, before this whole process of creation that brought them into being and continues to bring them into being from moment to moment. Okay, so everything will return to a state of nothingness if it wasn't being uttered right now, if the creation wasn't an ongoing, continuous thing. And this is what the Arizal states, even in inanimate objects, like stones and dust, mayim and water, there is an animating spirit, if you want to call it that, and a soul in the sense that it's that which brings it into being. Even a stone has being. It exists. But that being is the spark of godliness that keeps that thing in existence. That's its soul, so to speak. It's not a sentient soul, a soul that can feel or a soul that can communicate as such, but it is nevertheless a soul. Interestingly enough, King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, and the Arizal, and various certain Mekubalim, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and others, the author of the Zohar, were able to communicate with plants. They were able to communicate with trees and with plants and with animals for sure. Why? Because they tapped into the vibe, so to speak, that brought this thing into being, so they could communicate with it. They were able to communicate. And it is therefore a fact, as far as we're concerned, that there is communication even between plants. Between inanimate objects, not so much, or maybe not at all, but certainly between plants there's communication. In fact, there's a TED Talk. It's a very fascinating TED Talk, although the presenter is a very boring presenter. But there is a TED Talk called Plants That Talk or something like that. If anyone is interested, just drop me a line and I could try and find it for you. Where she discusses, she's a forester and someone who is a biologist, and she actually explains that there's communication between trees, there's communication between plants, and they've tested it with all kinds of scientific evidence. And she's not a cook at all; she's a scientist. But she says, she sees, she's done all these experiments and peer-reviewed experiments to show that parent trees look after their children trees much more than look after other trees. And they share carbon and they share water and they share, when a tree doesn't need, chlorophyll, they can send it to another tree and so on. In other words, there's communication going on between trees, information. If anyone wants, again, I'll be happy to send you the link to that TED Talk where you can see it for yourself. So there's things going on in the world that we're not really aware of because we're only tuned into one station. We don't tune into all the stations at the same time, right? People like the Arizal and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and King Solomon were able to tune into things that we have no conception of. We were able to tune into them and understand them. In any event, this is called the soul of, even a rock has a soul. In other words, a life force that brings it into existence. That is the enclosing of the letters of speech from the 10 utterances, which enliven and bring into being even inanimate objects. Doima means non-speaking inanimate. To bring it out of ex nihilo, from absolutely nothing. As it was before the 6 days of creation. Okay, so let's sum up briefly what we've discussed so far. What we've discussed so far is we want to understand this whole concept of the unity of transcendence and immanence, God's transcendence and immanence. We want to understand that. In order to be able to understand that, first we have to understand that all of creation, even inanimate matter, is enlivened and brought into being from moment to moment by the divine utterances, the 10 utterances through which the world was created. And these continue to be said all the time. And if the letters, in other words, the permutations and the forces that are presented by the letters would be withdrawn for you in a moment, all of creation, or that aspect of creation, would simply disappear and there would be nothing left of it. And so the Arizal says that within all created objects, in all created beings, there is a soul, even in inanimate objects, which is the utterance that brought that into being. And we will discuss that a little bit further next time. Are there any questions? Plant intelligence, I'm not sure that that's what it is, but while we're talking, while I'm perhaps answering another question, let me have a quick look on the TED Talks, and I'll see if I can find it. Okay, 1 second. Are there any other questions in the meanwhile? Let me see if it is that one. Michelle Small writes. Plant intelligence. No. There is one here called Plant Intelligence, the roots of plant intelligence, but that's not the one. It is not the one. Let me just post this one quickly for anyone to get if they want. Here's one, the roots of plant intelligence. So you said her name was Small Right. Let me see if I can find it. No, that's not the one. Forest, let me just see. That's something to do with forest. Yeah, here we go. This is the one. Suzanne Simard is her name. Here we go. How trees talk to each other. There you go. How trees talk to each other. Here we go. This is the one that I meant. This is the one that I meant. Oh, man. I'm getting phone calls from every angle over here. Okay. That's the one that I was talking about. She's not a great speaker, a great presenter, but oops, I should have stopped the recording.